The morning frost still lingered on the grass when Eli Mercer saddled his horse and headed into the woods behind his property. The wind bit at his skin, and the silence of the forest wrapped around him like a thick blanket. Eli wasn't out for cattle or chores that day. Something had felt wrong since dawn, a strange stillness that had drawn him toward the trees. He had lived alone for years now, his days reduced to routine and his nights haunted by memories he no longer shared with anyone. But that morning, the quiet held weight. A pressure in his chest pushed him deeper into the woods he thought he knew. As he passed the old creek bed, something caught his eye near the tree line. Movement small, slow, he froze. About 20 yards ahead, a figure emerged from the mist barefoot, trembling, barely more than a silhouette. It was a child. Eli dismounted quickly, heart pounding louder than his boots on the frozen soil. The girl looked no older than 7, her skin smeared with dirt and dried blood, her hair tangled into ropes. She wore a thin shirt and no coat, her arms wrapped around a single object pressed to her chest. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she only stared, wide-eyed and silent. Eli knelt down, raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "You okay, kid?" he asked gently. She flinched, taking a small step back. His breath caught when he saw what she was holding, a battered, stained teddy bear, its right ear torn, the left button eye dangling by a thread. Eli's vision blurred. He knew that bear. It had been his son's favorite. Jamie never went anywhere without it. The last time Eli had seen it was the day Jamie vanished 10 years ago, during a family trip that had torn his world apart. And now here it was, in the arms of a girl who didn't belong here. He reached out slowly, but she pulled the bear closer, her fingers clenched with surprising strength. Her lips quivered as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Eli stood, torn between confusion and panic. What was this child doing here, and how in God's name did she have that bear? "It's okay," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Let's get you warm." She didn't resist when he removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her body was ice cold, and she leaned slightly into the warmth, just enough for him to sense how fragile she really was. He carried her back to the ranch, trying to ignore the rising storm of questions in his head. The forest seemed to watch him as he walked, as if it knew something he didn't. Back at the cabin, he lit the stove and made a bed near the fireplace. She sat quietly, still clutching the bear, eyes darting around the room. When he offered her food, she refused. He tried to ask her name, but she only looked away. Eli didn't press her. The way she curled up near the fire, wary but exhausted, reminded him of his son during thunderstorms, more afraid and trying to be brave. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat at the edge of the kitchen table, staring at the bear now resting beside her. Every detail matched right down to the blue thread he'd used to stitch the neck years ago when it tore. It was no replica. It was Jamie's bear. His hands trembled as he poured himself a drink, but it didn't help. He stared at the sleeping girl, her chest rising and falling gently under the flannel blanket. Who was she? Where did she come from? And how was this possible? He called the sheriff the next morning but didn't mention the bear. Not yet. "Found a lost girl in the woods," he said flatly. "Looks like she's been out there a while." The sheriff promised to send someone, but Eli knew how it would go. Paperwork, temporary shelter, maybe an article in the paper, but no real answers. Not for a child like this, and certainly not in a town that had already written off his son's disappearance as a tragic accident. No body, no evidence. Just a boy who vanished into the woods and a man who never stopped searching. Now, 10 years later, a girl appeared from those same woods, holding the one thing that had never been recovered. Eli looked at her again. She was awake now, staring quietly at the fire. The bear still held close. There was something in her eyes that struck him, an old sadness, too deep for her age. He wondered if she remembered more than she let on. Maybe she had answers, or maybe she was just another mystery the forest had coughed up. Either way, Eli knew one thing for sure. His life, once again, had changed in a single morning. And this time, he wouldn't let the truth slip away. The sun filtered through the cabin windows the next morning, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Eli sat motionless at the table, the coffee in his mug long since gone cold. His gaze was fixed on the teddy bear now resting on the armchair across from him. It looked even smaller than he remembered, but every rip and stain screamed of familiarity. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. Across from him, the girl sat on a folded quilt, legs tucked underneath, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She hadn't said a word, but her presence said enough. She was a ghost, dragged from the past. Years had passed since that camping trip near the river bend. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, just Eli, his wife Margaret, and their 6-year-old son Jamie. The marriage was already crumbling, and the trip had been a last-ditch attempt to mend something that was probably beyond repair. Jamie had loved nature. He'd always begged to fish like his father and sleep under the stars. That morning, Eli had gone to gather firewood. When he returned, Margaret was screaming. Jamie was gone. No footprints, no trail. Just an empty clearing, and his teddy bear lying in the dirt. The search lasted weeks. Police combed the forest, Dogs were brought in, helicopters circled overhead, and volunteers from 3 counties walked shoulder to shoulder through the woods. But nothing, not a single trace. The authorities eventually declared Jamie presumed dead, likely drowned in the river. But Eli never believed that. He knew the woods. He knew Jamie. The boy would never go near the river alone. Something had taken him. Something or someone. And now, after all these years, the very bear Jamie slept with every night was in the hands of a stranger child. The grief had destroyed what was left of his marriage. Margaret left not long after, retreating to her sister's home upstate and cutting off all contact with Eli. He didn't blame her. Their pain took different shapes. Hers turned into silence, his into obsession. He couldn't move on. He sold the house, bought the ranch, and vanished into the outskirts. He told himself he was done hoping, done imagining what might have been. But a small part of him, buried deep, had never stopped looking, never stopped wondering what if. And now, everything he'd fought to bury was rising to the surface again. He watched the girl with guarded eyes. There were similarities in her expression, in the shape of her mouth, maybe even the tilt of her head. But he shook the thought away. She wasn't Jamie. She couldn't be. Still, the bear, the exact one, was a link too strong to ignore. It wasn't sold in stores anymore, not for years. And the blue thread on the neck, that was Eli's handiwork. He had sewn it himself the night Jamie ripped it during a tantrum. There was no logical explanation. That bear belonged to Jamie, and now this girl had it, which meant Jamie had been alive after the search ended. Eli stood and opened the drawer, where he kept Jamie's missing person flyer. The paper had yellowed with time, the edges curled. He stared at the photo, Jamie's smiling gap-toothed arms around the same teddy bear. He glanced back at the girl. She was now curled up asleep on the quilt, the bear back in her grip, his heart clenched. He didn't know who she was, but she had walked into his life carrying proof that his son's story hadn't ended the way everyone believed. Whether Jamie was alive or gone, this girl was part of that story. She was the first real clue in a decade. The memories flooded back stronger than before. The nights he spent in the forest screaming his son's name, the guilt that gnawed at his chest every day after. He remembered the faces of the searchers as they told him they'd found nothing again and again. And he remembered the moment he realized they had stopped looking, not because they'd lost hope, but because they never truly cared. A missing boy didn't stir much media when there were no suspects, no leads. Eli had been left alone with a broken life and a dead end. But now, after all this time, the forest had given something back. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew he couldn't let the authorities take her, not yet. They'd bury her in a system, lose her in bureaucracy. He needed time. Time to understand. Time to ask the right questions. Maybe even time to hope again. He knelt by her side, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She stirred but didn't wake. Her face was peaceful in the firelight, innocent yet haunted. Eli whispered, almost to himself, "Where did you come from, little one? And what do you know about my boy?" The silence answered back, heavy and full of ghosts. The days that followed passed in strange silence. The girl remained mute, watching Eli from the corners of rooms, eyes wary like a stray animal, unsure of kindness. She never answered when he spoke. She didn't cry, didn't laugh, didn't scream, just observed. When he approached too quickly, she flinched. When he offered her food, she waited until he walked away before eating. It was more than shyness. It was fear, a deep-learned fear that seemed to live inside her bones. Eli had seen it before in broken horses and battered dogs, but never in a child. It chilled him. He tried not to push. He kept his voice low, his movements slow. He left small gestures, a warm cup of tea, a folded blanket, paper and crayons near the fire. She never touched the crayons, but she clutched the teddy bear as if it were armor, her tiny fingers gripping its matted fur with white-knuckled desperation. He noticed how she always positioned herself near walls or corners, never in open space. And when the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin, she'd curl into herself, eyes closed, lips pressed tight, as if bracing for something. Eli kept a journal of everything he observed, her eating habits, sleep patterns, behavior. He wasn't sure why, maybe to make sense of her, maybe to understand what she'd been through. One morning, as she bathed in the tub he'd filled with warm water, he noticed something that made his stomach twist. Thin, faded scars circled both her wrists and ankles. Not from accidents, not from play. These were clean, intentional marks. The kind left by restraints. Rope, maybe. Chains. Eli backed away, nausea rising in his throat. What kind of life had she lived before stumbling into his woods? He didn't ask her about the scars. He knew she wouldn't answer, and he feared her reaction. Instead, he stood in the doorway that night, watching her sleep in the same position as always, teddy bear pressed to her chest, one hand clenched near her neck, legs drawn tight. She never slept deeply. The slightest creak woke her. Sometimes, she sat up suddenly, breathing fast, eyes wide with unspoken terror. Once he caught her sleepwalking, standing in the hallway staring at nothing, murmuring words in a language he didn't recognize. Her world, whatever it had been, had not let her rest. He thought about taking her to a doctor, a therapist, someone trained, but deep down he feared the system more than he trusted it. Once they saw her silence, her scars, her foreign features, they'd label her, categorize her, move her somewhere cold and sterile, and they'd forget about the bear, forget about Jamie. Eli couldn't let that happen. This wasn't just about her. This was about his son. That teddy bear tied her to Jamie in a way that no coincidence could explain. He needed answers, but he also needed to protect her, even if it meant going alone. That week he made changes around the cabin. New locks, reinforced windows, more firewood. He cancelled his trips to town and began ordering supplies by phone. The fewer people who knew she was there, the better. When the mailman knocked, she hid under the bed. When the dogs from the neighboring farm barked too long, she covered her ears and rocked slightly. There were moments Eli felt she might vanish if he blinked too long. He began sleeping lighter, always listening for her. For the creak of the floorboards, the sudden thud of a nightmare or panic. One evening, she stood by the fireplace and traced her finger along the wood grain of the mantel. Eli watched from the kitchen without turning. She slowly lifted the bear and held it close to her face, inhaling its scent as if trying to remember something. Then, in a move that stopped his breath, she held it out to him just for a second before pulling it back and retreating to her corner. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something, a fracture in the wall between them. Eli didn't speak, he didn't move, he just nodded and whispered, "Thank you," hoping she understood. He didn't sleep much that night. The image of the scars haunted him. So did the question that had begun to take shape in his mind. If this girl had been kept somewhere hidden, isolated, possibly restrained, then someone out there had done it. And if she had Jamie's bear, if she had some piece of Eli's lost life in her hands, then whoever had kept her might have known about Jamie. Might still know. The thought was unbearable. He looked out the window into the darkness beyond the tree line and wondered, for the first time in years, if someone out there was watching them now. That night, after the girl had fallen asleep curled near the fire, Eli sat alone at the kitchen table with the teddy bear resting in front of him. The flame from the oil lamp cast soft shadows as he turned the toy over slowly in his hands. His fingers trembled as they traced the stitching along its neck, then stopped. There, beneath the ear, hidden in a faded seam, was a line of tiny, uneven stitches. Blue thread. His breath caught. He remembered it vividly. Margaret had sewn that by hand after Jamie tore the bear during a tantrum. She hadn't wanted him to notice, so she stitched it late one night by lamplight. Just like this. There was no way it was a replica. No factory in the world duplicated Margaret's hands. That detail made it real, undeniable. This was Jamie's bear. Eli placed it down gently, as if it might break under the weight of what it carried. His pulse raced, his chest tight with a feeling that hovered between hope and dread. How had this mute, unknown, injured come to possess something so intimately tied to the boy who vanished a decade ago? The question gnawed at him until he could no longer sit still. He needed answers, and he knew no one would give them freely. The next morning, Eli drove into town for the first time in weeks. The streets were quiet, dust swirling in lazy gusts. As he parked outside the diner, people still looked at him like a ghost. Whispers followed him everywhere since Jamie disappeared. Most had moved on, pitied him quietly, assumed he'd lost his mind. But Eli had never cared much for gossip. He ordered coffee and sat near the back, listening names, events, small-town chatter. And then he asked the waitress casually, "Any strange folks been around the forest lately? Camps, unfamiliar faces?" She raised an eyebrow and shook her head. "Not that I've heard." "Eli, you thinking of setting traps again?" He checked the community bulletin board outside the post. Office next. Lost pets, firewood ads, a missing teenage girl from a nearby county 6 months gone. Her face stared back at him from a crumpled flyer. He grabbed it and tucked it into his coat. Maybe nothing, maybe not. Then he headed to the sheriff's office. The deputy behind the desk didn't even look up when Eli walked in. "Still chasing ghosts," the man muttered. Eli ignored him. "I need access to incident reports near the East Forest." "Past 5 years," the deputy scoffed. "You know that ain't how it works." Eli leaned in. "Then point me to someone who remembers how it used to work." An older officer, Dawson, emerged from the back. He had known Eli since before Jamie's birth. "What are you looking for exactly?" he asked carefully. Eli hesitated. "Strange activity near my land. Missing persons, break-ins, campsites, anything that might have happened where the forest runs deep." Dawson gave him a long, measured look. "What brought this on?" Eli didn't answer. After a pause, Dawson sighed. "Let me check what I can find, but, off the record, you might want to let the past lie, Eli." Eli's jaw tightened. "I would, if it ever died." Word spread quickly in a small town, and before Eli could finish his errands, 2 old-timers pulled him aside near the hardware store. "Heard you're sniffing around again," one said, not unkindly. "Look, it's been years. If there was anything to find, it would have turned up." Eli thanked them but said nothing. On his way back to the truck, someone else he didn't catch the name muttered, "Don't go digging too deep, Eli. Not everything out there wants to be found." The word stuck with him the entire ride home. It wasn't just warning, it was fear. Something had people spooked. Back at the cabin, the girl was right where he left her. She didn't move when he walked in, just stared at the fire. Eli sat near her but said nothing. He took out the bear again, holding it gently. This bear belonged to Jamie, he said softly. He was my son. Her eyes didn't meet his, but she seemed to listen. If you know anything at all, his voice broke. She blinked slowly, hugging her knees tighter. Still, she said nothing, but her fingers curled into the bear's fur like it was the only safe place left in the world. Eli felt the same. That night, sleep didn't come. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, playing every conversation from town over in his mind. The fear in people's voices, the avoidance in their eyes, the silence from the earth wasn't just apathy, it was something deeper. Maybe they knew more than they let on, or maybe they'd seen things they couldn't explain. Either way, Eli now understood. He was on his own. The girl had brought more than a bear into his home. She had brought a question that had been buried too long, and Eli was no longer willing to leave it unanswered. The drive north was long and quiet. Eli hadn't been to Margaret since the divorce, and even then, their final words had been bitter, heavy with pain neither of them knew how to carry. He had rehearsed what he would say the whole way, but as the town faded in his rearview mirror and the wooded highway unfolded before him, his thoughts blurred. All he had was a photo of the girl and the bear, both tucked in a manila envelope, on the passenger seat. The closer he got to her house, the heavier it felt, like grief waiting to be reopened after years of silence. Margaret answered the door slowly, eyes tired, lines deeper than he remembered. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him like she was seeing a ghost. "Eli," she finally said, not cold but cautious. "What are you doing here?" He didn't waste time. He held out the envelope. "I need you to look at something." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from too many years spent alone. Pictures lined the walls, none recent, all reminders of a life paused in grief. She opened the envelope at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling slightly. When she pulled out the photo of the bear in the girl's arms, her reaction was instant. She gasped and covered her mouth, eyes flooding with tears. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's his. That's Jamie's bear." Eli nodded, but didn't speak. She reached out to touch the image as if she could feel the fabric through the paper. "I stitched that neck after he tore it by..." The Laker voice cracked. "How is this possible?" Eli took a deep breath. "A little girl came out of the woods last week. She had it with her." Margaret stared at him, stunned. "Where is she? Who is she?" He showed her the other photo, a close-up of the girl sitting near the fire. Margaret's hands shook as she studied the image. She's beautiful," she whispered, then choked on her own breath. "She looks like Jamie." Eli leaned forward, voice low. "I don't know who she is or where she came from, but she won't talk. She's terrified, and she clings to that bear like it's all she has left in the world." The silence between them stretched, weighted with disbelief and something else neither of them dared to say aloud. Margaret suddenly stood, pacing the room. Her hands were restless, moving through air that felt too thick. "Eli," she began, then stopped. When she finally turned to him, her eyes were wild with a mixture of fear and hope. "Do you think he's alive?" Her voice broke in the middle. "After all this time, do you think Jamie's still out there?" Eli didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, calloused and still shaking. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But this girl didn't just find that bear in the woods. Someone gave it to her." They sat in silence for a long time, the question lingering in the room like smoke. Margaret finally sank into the chair across from him. "I used to dream about him," she said softly. "That he'd walk through the door one day, smiling like nothing had ever happened. I stopped letting myself believe in that dream a long time ago." Her voice fell to a whisper. "But now I don't know what to believe." Eli reached across the table and took her hand. It had been years since they'd touched, and it felt foreign and familiar all at once. "We need to find out the truth, whatever it is." Margaret nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" Eli stood, slipping the photos back into the envelope. "I'm going to protect that girl, and I'm going to find out how she ended up with that bear. Because if Jamie is out there, if he's alive, then someone has been keeping secrets for a long time, and I'm done waiting." Margaret followed him to the door, her expression a storm of fear and longing. "Be careful," she said. Eli paused on the porch, then glanced back. "I will," he said, "but I won't stop. Not this time." The knock on the door came just after sunrise. Eli, still half-dressed and nursing his first cup of coffee, wasn't expecting anyone. The girl sat near the hearth, cradling the bear as usual, her eyes already alert and wary. When Eli opened the door, a tall Native American man stood on the porch. His features were weathered, his expression unreadable. He wore a heavy coat and carried no bag, no weapon, just presence. "You have something that belongs to us," the man said without greeting. His voice was calm but carried an edge like flint striking steel. "The girl, she needs to come with me." Eli stiffened, one hand resting on the doorframe. "Who are you?" he asked. The man didn't flinch. "My name is Nodin. I speak for those who cannot speak. She is from the village we call the Shadow Place. She was taken from us. She needs to come home." Eli glanced over his shoulder at the girl. Her eyes were wide, her grip on the bear tightening. She had edged back toward the wall like a cornered animal. "She doesn't want to go," Eli said quietly. "She hasn't said a word, but I know fear when I see it, and she's terrified of you." Nodin stepped forward, gaze steady. "She remembers pain, not truth. You think you are helping her, but this is not your fight." Eli didn't move. "Then help me understand," he said. "Where has she been? Why does she have my son's bear?" At that, Nodin's face shifted slightly, the calm cracking for just a moment. He didn't answer the question. Instead he said, "She is not yours. She was never meant to be with you." Eli took a breath. "Then why did she come out of my woods holding the one thing that connects her to my son?" "You want answers, I want them too." They stood in tense silence, the cold morning air curling around them. Behind Eli, the fire crackled softly, a faint sound against the weight of the moment. Nodin finally said, "The shadow place is not. For outsiders, what happens there is not meant for your world." But she crossed that line, and now she carries things that do not belong to her. Eli narrowed his eyes. "What does she carry?" Nodin's gaze darkened. "Memory loss. Maybe more, but she is not yours to keep." The words were firm, but not threatening. They sounded more like prophecy than demand. Eli stepped fully into the doorway, blocking the entrance. "I'm not handing her over to a stranger who shows up unannounced and talks in riddles," he said. "She's safe here. She stays." Nodin gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Very well," he said. "But understand this. She is part of a story that began long before she met you, and you are not its ending." He turned to leave, then paused at the edge of the porch. Without looking back, he added, "She is not yours, but what she carries is." Then he walked away into the trees, disappearing like mist. Eli watched him vanish down the path, heart pounding, unease twisting inside him. He locked the door and returned to the girl, who was now curled tightly against the wall, rocking slightly. He sat beside her but didn't touch her. "You know him?" he asked softly. No response, only the quiet rustle of fabric and the low hum of fear. "Did he hurt you?" Still silence. Eli sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. The encounter had opened a door he didn't know existed, and now that it was ajar, darkness was leaking through it. Whatever the truth was, it was bigger than him. That night, Eli checked the locks twice. He moved a chair beneath the front doorknob and kept the fire burning longer than usual. The girl finally fell asleep beside the bear, but her body never fully relaxed. She was waiting for something, or someone. Eli sat by the window, shotgun resting across his knees, staring out at the tree line. He replayed Nodin's words again and again. "She is not yours, but what she carries is." It wasn't just about Jamie anymore. It was about something buried deeper, something that had been hidden for years, and it had finally come to the surface. The wind howled against the cabin that night, rattling the shutters and sending dry leaves skittering across the porch. Eli had just settled into his chair by the fire, eyes heavy, when he heard it faint murmurs from the girl's corner. At first, he thought she was crying in her sleep, but as he approached he realized it wasn't crying, she was speaking. Her voice was low, urgent, as if caught in a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The words flowed in a rhythm, unfamiliar and haunting, each syllable coated in pain. Eli froze, then quietly reached for his phone and hit record. He crouched near the hearth, trying not to make a sound. Her eyes were closed, her body still, but her lips moved steadily. It wasn't English, not Spanish either. The tone felt older, deeper, almost like a chant or a memory being whispered through her. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. She turned over, curling tighter into herself. The bear pressed close. Eli sat back, heart racing, phone still recording in his palm. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. Instead, he replayed the audio over and over, each strange syllable echoing louder than the last dot. By morning, Eli knew what he had to do. He called in a favor from an old acquaintance, Dr. Arlen Shaw, a retired linguistics professor who had spent decades studying Native American dialects. Eli hadn't spoken to him in years, but desperation had a way of rekindling lost ties. Shaw agreed to meet at the university archives that afternoon. The drive felt surreal, the phone in Eli's pocket, buzzing with a mystery that might finally lead to answers. He parked on campus, found Shaw in a quiet office filled with books and maps, and handed him the recording without a word. The professor listened intently, adjusting his headphones, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. When the audio ended, he sat back in silence for a moment. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Eli hesitated. "From a child, one who doesn't speak while awake. She said that in her sleep." Shaw tapped his pen against the desk, then turned to a bookshelf and pulled out a thin, worn volume. "This isn't a common dialect," he said. "It's from a nearly extinct Algonquian branch spoken by a small band believed to have vanished decades ago." He flipped through pages, eyes scanning symbols and notes until he found the passage he was looking for. He read it silently, lips moving, then looked up at Eli with a strange expression, half concern, half disbelief. "Rough translation," he said slowly, "is, the white boy was never meant to be taken." Eli's breath caught in his throat. "The white boy," Shaw nodded. "It's not vague, it refers to a specific child. This isn't just ceremonial language, it's a record, a warning perhaps. These people believe strongly in spiritual boundaries. Taking someone not of their blood, that would be seen as a serious transgression. Eli sank into the chair across from him, mind reeling. So she's repeating something she heard? He asked. Shaw shrugged. Or something she was told, often enough to dream in it. He paused. The way she says it's not accusatory, it's mournful, like she's repeating what others regretted doing. Eli stared at the floor. The bear, the scars, the silence. Now these words. It was all connecting, forming the shape of a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to see. Do you think they took my son? He asked. Shaw didn't answer directly. I think you're closer to the truth than you've ever been. Back at the cabin, the girl was still asleep when Eli returned. He sat beside her, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her breathing was calm now, steady, but the words she'd spoken echoed in his mind. The white boy was never meant to be taken. Not lost, not missing, taken. That changed everything. Someone had made a choice 10 years ago, and it had torn his life apart. Now, through this fragile child, the truth was trying to find its way back. Eli knew it wouldn't come easy, and it wouldn't come clean, but it was coming, and he would be ready when it did. Eli returned to the sheriff's office under a gray sky, the air thick with unease. He didn't expect much the department. That had failed him before, but something told him the answers he needed were buried in their own forgotten files. Deputy Dawson was out, but the clerk at the front desk barely glanced up as Eli walked in. He said he needed to review archived reports, anything tied to missing children, tribal involvement, or unusual activity from a decade ago. She shrugged, handed him a guest pass, and pointed toward the back room, where cabinets lined the walls like a mausoleum of unresolved truths. The archive room smelled of dust and disuse. Folders were labeled by year, many of them crumbling at the edges. Eli sifted through reports from the year Jamie vanished, his fingers aching with every new discovery that led to nowhere, until he opened a folder labeled Protective Custody Disputes minus 10 years back. Inside, among pages of legal jargon, one case stood out. It detailed an investigation into a remote indigenous community accused of harboring children taken from local foster homes. The justification, according to the witness statement, to protect them from abuse. Eli read on, pulse quickening. The report mentioned multiple children found on tribal lands, none officially registered as missing. No formal charges were filed. The community claimed they were saving the children from systems that had already failed them. But what made Eli's hands go cold was a name buried in the last paragraph. James Mercer, presumed deceased, no body recovered. His eyes locked on the line, heart hammering. His son, listed not as kidnapped or missing but as dead. No evidence, no autopsy. Just an assumption written into a forgotten file. He stood there staring at the page as if it might burst into flames. For 10 years, everyone had told him Jamie was gone. He had searched rivers, combed the woods, begged for attention no one gave him. All the while, the department had quietly buried this. A community, known to them, had taken children, including one with his son's name, and no one had bothered to investigate further. It wasn't negligence, it was intentional. The less attention, the less pressure, the less they'd have to admit what had been stolen in plain sight. Eli photocopied the pages quickly, his hands shaking as he fed them through the machine. Every piece felt heavier than the last. He stuffed the copies into his jacket and walked out without a word. Outside, the clouds were darker now, the air heavier. The truth had always been there, buried beneath bureaucracy, sealed under silence. They hadn't even bothered to notify him when they closed the file. Jamie's name had become paperwork and inconvenience to file away. And now that he knew, Eli wasn't going to let it stay that way. Back at the cabin, the girl watched him, with wide eyes as he came through the door. He didn't speak at first. He set the papers on the table, lit the fire, and sat beside her. She shifted slightly closer, her expression cautious but curious. Eli placed the teddy bear in her lap, then took her hand gently. "You're not the only one who was taken," he said softly. "There were others, including my son." Her eyes flickered, something inside her tightening, like the words had sparked a memory she couldn't yet explain. The silence between them was deep, but no longer empty. That night, Eli pored over the documents again by firelight, circling names, underlining locations. Every new detail brought him closer to a past someone had tried to erase. It was clear now someone in power had helped those children disappear, and someone else had chosen not to look. But the truth had survived in dreams, in old scars, in the frightened gaze of a girl who had wandered out of the woods with a message buried in her silence. Eli wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. He was chasing the people who had made them. Now he knew where to look. Eli waited until the girl was asleep to carefully collect a few strands of her hair for a DNA test, feeling guilty about potentially betraying the fragile trust they were building. Despite his doubts and fears, he knew he had to find the truth. He sent the sample for urgent analysis, then faced the agonizing weight, spending his days observing the girl's silent reactions and the small ways she began to trust him. Their bond grew quietly, marked by shared routines and peaceful moments. Though she remained mostly silent, Over time, Eli noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. Her eyes lightened, and one afternoon she even smiled faintly while clutching the teddy bear. This small gesture filled Eli with a deep, patient love and hope that she was beginning to feel safe. He cherished these moments of connection, reading Jamie's old picture books to her by the fire, feeling closer to family than he had in years. Yet the lingering questions about her past and Jamie's fate weighed heavily on his mind. The next morning, the long-awaited DNA results arrived. Eli opened the envelope with trembling hands, and the scientific report confirmed what he had hoped and feared. The girl was biologically related to Jamie Mercer with a 98.4% match. The revelation struck Eli hard, shaking him to his core. The girl wasn't just a mysterious child from the forest, she was family, a living link to the son he had lost. Staggered by the truth, Eli realized the journey was far from over. This child carried the past with her, but also the possibility of healing and reunion. For the first time in a long time, hope blossomed alongside his grief. Together, they were not just survivors, they were a family bound by blood and a shared destiny, ready to face whatever came next. One tense night, Eli and the girl were forced to hide in a crawlspace beneath the cabin floor when armed men speaking an unknown language arrived, searching for them. Hours passed in suffocating darkness as Eli realized powerful forces wanted to keep their story hidden. When the danger finally passed, Eli found signs of a raid and knew they were being hunted. With urgency, he packed their essentials, including the teddy bear and critical documents, and decided they had to flee that very night to stay alive. Driving through the night toward an uncertain future, Eli felt a mix of hope and dread as the girl finally found some calm, clutching the bear beside him. At dawn, they reached a small city, and Eli checked into a discreet motel, promising her safety. Though the threat still loomed, this fragile peace was a start. As shadows moved outside, Eli steeled himself not just as a father desperate to protect, but as a man ready to uncover the truth about his missing son and fight for their families. Future. The envelope sat on Eli's kitchen table for hours, unopened, as if the weight of what it might contain was too much to bear all at once. The air in the small cabin felt heavy, thick with anticipation and fear. The girl sat nearby, silent, but watching, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. Eli finally reached for the envelope, fingers trembling as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the printed results of the DNA test. His breath hitched as he read the words that would change everything. The girl is the biological daughter of Jamie Mercer. The reality of those words struck him like a thunderclap. Jamie had survived. Not just survived, but had a life, a daughter who now sat in his home, silent and scared but alive. Eli felt a mixture of relief and confusion swirl inside him. How had Jamie survived all these years? Why had he never returned? And most urgently, where was he now? The questions crowded his mind, each one heavier than the last. The silence of the cabin pressing in around him. He looked over at the girl. For the first time, their connection deepened beyond unspoken words and shared fear. She wasn't just a lost child found in the woods, she was family, a living piece of Jamie's story. Eli's heart ached with the possibilities. He felt the weight of responsibility more sharply than ever. Not only was he a father searching for his son, but now he was a grandfather, protector of the next generation. The stakes had become immeasurably higher. Despite the joy, doubt gnawed at him. Was Jamie alive by choice or by force? Had he been hiding, captured, or had he built a new life in the shadows, away from everything Eli knew? The past decade had been a void, full of unanswered questions and false hopes. Eli clenched his fists. Whatever the truth was, he was determined to find it. He owed it to Jamie, and now to his granddaughter. The family lost to silence would be found. Eli pulled out the files he had gathered, the reports, photos, and notes. He spread them across the table, piecing together fragments of a story that refused to stay buried. Patterns emerged. Sightings, whispers of a man fitting Jamie's description seen in neighboring towns, vague mentions and local legends about a white boy taken in by a native tribe. The clues were sparse but undeniable. Someone, somewhere, had to know more. Eli resolved to follow every lead, no matter where it took him. He considered the dangers ahead. If there were people powerful enough to send armed men after the girl and him, they wouldn't stop now. They wanted to keep the truth hidden: Jamie's survival, his daughter, the secrets intertwined in their family's history. Eli's resolve hardened. He had to be smarter, faster, more cautious, but he also had to be brave. For Jamie, for the girl, for the truth. The fight was far from over. That night, Eli sat beside the girl as she slept, the bear tucked between them. The quiet was different, now filled with possibility rather than fear. He whispered promises into the darkness, vowing to protect her and to find the father she never knew. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in shared silence and newfound hope. Eli finally allowed himself to believe that family could heal even the deepest wounds. As dawn broke, Eli packed a small bag. Tomorrow, he would begin the search in earnest. Wherever Jamie was alive, hidden, or in danger, Eli would find him. The past was no longer a closed chapter. It was a story waiting to be finished, and Eli was ready to write the final pages. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire and the slow rhythm of the girl's breathing. Eli sat beside her, holding the teddy bear close, his mind racing through the whirlwind of discoveries, dangers, and hopes that had brought them to this moment. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, she looked directly at him. The silence stretched between them until she spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Daddy told me to find you if something happened." The words landed, like a gentle thunder, shaking Eli to his core. Tears spilled down Eli's cheeks unbidden, blurring the firelight into soft halos around the room. He reached out, cradling her face with hands roughened by years of hard living. "You said it," he whispered, voice cracking. "You spoke." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with a mixture of relief and fear. That single sentence carried a weight that years of silence could not hold. It was a bridge from the past to the future, a promise kept across time and pain. Eli's heart swelled with a fragile hope. The connection between them was no longer just protection or survival. It was family role, complicated and real. He thought of Jamie, wondering what kind of man he had become, what hardships he had faced to send this message through his daughter. The girl squeezed the bear tighter, as if drawing strength from it. "He wanted you to know," she said softly. "He wanted you to find us." Eli swallowed hard, knowing this was only the beginning. They sat together in the flickering glow, a silent pact forming between them. Eli realized he was no longer just a man searching for a lost son. He was now a guardian for a future still unwritten. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, "We're going to find him." Together, the weight of the journey ahead felt lighter with her presence. And for the first time in years, Eli allowed himself to believe in a tomorrow where the family was whole again. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets Eli was determined to uncover. He looked down at the teddy bear, now worn but beloved, and held it close. The bear had been a symbol of loss, but now it was a symbol of hope, connections that survived time, silence, and darkness. With it in his hands, Eli felt the strength to face whatever waited beyond the horizon. That night, he packed his gear carefully, preparing for the search that would take them far beyond the borders of his ranch. The girl watched quietly, no longer just a frightened child, but a partner in the quest for truth. As he secured the bear in his bag, Eli felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just chasing shadows anymore. He was chasing a family's final chance at redemption and reunion. Before dawn, Eli knelt beside the girl and whispered a promise to keep her safe. She nodded, a spark of courage lighting her eyes. Together, they stepped out into the cool morning air, leaving behind the cabin that had sheltered so many secrets. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and questions, but Eli's heart was steady. They were ready. As the sun rose, casting golden light over the horizon, Eli took one last look at the bear in his hands. It was more than a toy, it was a link between the past and the future, a beacon guiding him toward the son he had lost and the family he was determined to find. With the girl by his side and the bear close to his heart, Eli began the journey that would change everything.